Welcome back, CIS 1400, and welcome to part 3 of Module 8. In the previous modules, we talked about how to create a class and the attributes in there. In the previous video, we talked about how to create the accessor and mutator methods for the class. And again, why the need for making private attributes. You're going to notice in this version of the program, I added a couple more attributes to our person. The person not only has an address, like a street address, but they also have, a city, state, and zip code that they live in. And I created also the accompanied accessor and mutator methods for those. The reason I wanted to do that is because I want to also talk about today how to make your own object methods. So these are really object methods that you have down here. You can tell that they're object methods because they contain the keyword self in them. And we have to access them through an object identifier like we did in our person's test. They all had to be accessed, let's see if I can click over, through person 1 or person 2. I couldn't say person as a class and get access to the set name and get names methods or anything like that. So what I want to do is kind of cut back over here and talk about how we can make some other methods that can do other things, so build some actual behaviors for this other than just working with the attributes, which is an important feature, but it'd be nice if you can do a little bit more. So let's actually come down here, we'll make some object methods that are specific to the object, and in this one, why don't we make like a print address kind of method, something that'll print like almost an address label that would go on an envelope. So the person's name followed by their street address and then city, comma, state, or city, state, comma, zip code. So let's kind of see if we can just get that to at least print in that manner, and then that way we can kind of see the full-blown address of them. So we're going to do def, we'll do like display address. Notice it's not a get method or anything like that. We're not just getting one piece of information or setting any particular piece of information. We'd like this to actually do a couple of things for us. Maybe it just prints out what it is. So I throw in the parentheses. Now this particular method's not going to need any information from the client or the test class or the test file in order to do its particular info. All the info we need is actually in this class, and I know it's not in the function itself, but all the info we need is actually up here in the constructor. Now this kind of breaks the rules of what we went across before, and maybe you've already been witnessing that, like I've been able to use variables that in methods that weren't declared in those methods, and they're not global variables either, but in a sense they kind of are. Anytime we use this keyword self before a variable name, specifically in the constructor, technically we can do it anywhere we want. What this does is it creates a variable, a space in memory, that we can access from anywhere we have the keyword self there. And that's kind of why we need that parameter self in there, so that we can gain access to this information that we have. And we have an object method here. It has the word self associated with it, so we have access to everything that has the word self associated with it. So let's get in here and start printing out all the information we need. So for an address label, typically what you'll see is something get printed of the form where it'll say Jane Adams, and then it'll print something like, let's bring this over here, 123 Hello Lane, and then it'll also print the city, state, and zip. So it'll print, you know, Chicago, Illinois, and then it'll say something like and then it'll say comma the zip code 77345, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But that's kind of the idea of what we want it to print. So 3 lines of text all kind of written out in that way. So we can start to build that output and kind of print it as we want, okay? So let's do this. We'll say print, okay? And we're going to go self.name. And we can literally print self.__name if we want. Or we can use that get method. I prefer using the get method. So we'll do something like get name, okay? And then it'll actually print out the name. And then we can print self.address or get address, right? And then we'll start printing out the other piece of information that we have here. So let's start building the strings that we need. So we might do, for the last line, the city, state, zip, I'm actually going to build a variable that'll hold everything. It'll be a little easier to work with. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go city, state, and zip. And I'm going to build that string. So I'm going to do self dot get city plus, I'm going to put in a space because I want to see that, plus self dot get state, and I want to follow that up with a plus, and I want to put a comma there and a space, and then plus self dot get zip. Okay. Now some of these are integers and things of that nature. So get city's a string, get state's a string, zip code is an integer. So I'm actually going to wrap this in an str function so that I don't have any problems with the addition in Python, because I want to make sure that my addition's nice and clean, that it's string plus a string plus a string plus a string plus a string. If this happens to be an integer argument that we pass in, I want to make sure that's there. And so then the last thing I want to do is just simply print the variable that I created, city, state, zip. Alright, so that's a nice easy way to kind of say display address. Now let's see if we can actually work with this. Okay, so let's come over here, we'll go persons test. I'm going to get rid of some of this old info because it doesn't really work for us anymore. And we'll create a person. We'll call this person, Steve Jobs or something like that. So we'll call him Steve. Okay, it doesn't have to be person 1 and person 2. We'll call this one Steve. And we'll say Steve is a person. Okay, and if we think about this, a person needs a name, an address, a city, state, zip, and phone number. So let's give him a name. We'll call it Steve Jobs. Now, I really have no idea where Steve Jobs used to live, but I'm sure it was somewhere in California, San Francisco. So let's go with the address. It's like 737. Oh, make that a string. 11 Ocean Ave. Okay, state, or I'm sorry, city, we'll call it San Francisco. We'll go California. And I have no idea what the zip code is in California, so we'll just type one in, 598743. That's probably too many digits. And the last thing we need is a phone number. Of course, I have no idea what Steve Jobs' phone number is, but we'll just give it a 555-7342. Okay, let's just call it that. So now again, I can do all the same stuff that I did with Steve as I did with person 1 and person 2 in the previous examples. I can get their name, get their address, get their city, get their zip code, set them, do whatever I want. But really what I want to do is display like a printout of an address label. So what I can do is I can go Steve dot, and I can do any of these get methods that I want, but really what I want to try to do is display address. Okay, and that's all I really want to do in this particular example. And so let's go through, we'll run person, and it prints out exactly the way that we want it. Probably would want to abbreviate California, we could type in an abbreviation for California here, or we could write a method that would find its abbreviation or find a way to do it. And that's fine, but that's beside the point in this particular example. The example is simple, that I'm able to create a method that pertains to this one particular object here, a display address method, and I'm able to write it in a way that it can do what I need it to do. Now, just because it's a display address, it doesn't mean we can't like return all this same information. We can also make another method that would return it if we so wished. Return methods are totally valid for object methods, so we can do def instead of display address. We can say return address. And it would do essentially the exact same information, but instead of printing it, we start actually building a variable that is the full-blown mailing address. So we might do something like mailing equals, and we could say self.getName just to begin with. And then to that, I'm also going to add a new line of text, right? And then we're going to go mailing address plus equals, because I want to keep appending more information to there, the address. So we'll go with self.get address, right? And again, we'll add a /n to it, so for a new line. And then we'll go mailing address plus equals, and here's where we can start putting in some of the other parts. Add the city, state, and zip, so we can say something just exactly of the nature of what we had up here. So I'll just copy that bit of code. And the last thing I might add to it is another /n, just to make sure it's on a separate line of text when it's all said and done. And I could return the mailing address, right? And so it doesn't matter if I'm making object methods that are void methods that are just modules, or if I'm making full-blown return methods or functions. They can both be object methods in their own right, and I could do different things with them. So I can come over here to persons test, and instead of saying display address, I could use the method in a more meaningful way, like printing Steve's dot return address, right? And now I've got that information, and I can run it, and it prints out the exact same thing. Nice thing is now I can use that in a program somewhere that could maybe build a bunch of address labels or something of that nature to help me out, okay? So that's kind of the idea behind an object method. Again, object methods can also have arguments passed to them. So let's maybe come up with a method here that allows us to use different pieces of information. So I could do something like, let's say, I want to return the phone number, but I want to make sure that it has a specific title to it. So we'll do something like def print phone. Okay, so self, and then we'll type in like a title or something like this. So we'll do something like title to this particular method. And title is just simply going to be a string. Okay, so then we might print out the title. Okay, whatever it might be, follow it up with whatever we want, so we can print the person's name. So we'll do, what do I want? Self.getName. And then we'll print self.getPhone, right? And so when I come over here and actually run it, now I can say, instead of just print, or I could say Steve, since we wrote a module or a non-return method, we could say like, what was it, get, what did we call it over here? It was print phone, okay? Print phone. And what I need to do is then provide it with some sort of information. So this will be like, we'll give it a cell phone declaration, or a business card, or something like that, or we'll just say Apple Incorporated contact. Okay, so there's kind of the title that we wanted, and so what it'll do is it'll actually print out that title first, because I'm able to pass that information in, and then it prints out Steve Jobs and his particular phone number, or however we wanted to do it. So different ways of going about it. Again, my methods could do something. They could manipulate the information and use it in some sort of meaningful way. We'll get into some of those more complexities as we start working our way down, but for right now we're just trying to keep it basic and how we can work with these types of methods and do different things with them. So those are our object methods. The other types of methods we have are what we call static methods. And generally static methods deal with static members of the class. And if you recall, we had a static member of the class called numPeople. Okay? NumPeople just tracked how many people we had made, and so maybe I want a method in here instead of being able to access that attribute directly, since it's never really a good idea to access it through a method of the class. So I might do something like def get numPeople. Okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate that word self, and see how it kind of typed itself in right away. So actually, in order to eliminate it, let me show you something we can do in Python. We can add what we call decorators. So I can say @static method, and now when I actually type this method out, so we'll say get numPeople. When I do the parentheses, now it doesn't actually put that word self in there, because it knows that the method that I'm currently writing is not meant to be called from any one specific instance of the class. It'll have to be called through the class identifier. And so now I can do this where it'll just simply print the number of people. People created. I might do that, and then do a colon, and then I'll do persons num people to access it exactly the way that I want. So if I come over here to the client, okay, it will just comment out these particular lines so that we're not seeing it anymore, which is fine. But now I can go person dot get, get num people, okay? And what that method will do is now return how many people have been created. In our case, people created has been 1. If we ended up creating other people, so instead of just Steve, let's create another instance. I'm just going to copy and paste, and we'll just do a couple of them, and we'll change some of their info. So instead of it being Steve, we'll call it Tom, and we'll call it Jed, and we'll call him or her Stacy, okay? And we'll change some of the info about it. Not much. We'll just go Tom, Jed, and Stacy. And their addresses and information is completely irrelevant to this particular example, but at least now we can see as we start creating these people, the number of people actually changes, and this method now, when it calls it, actually runs exactly how many people got created. So usually your static attributes or your static methods are meant to manipulate or access static attributes, and your object methods are best to access and manipulate information about the object itself. So you won't put those decorators, okay, prior to any object method, but you would put it prior to any static method that you choose to create. It's just a nice way of going about it. So if you've got a method that pertains to the class but not to any one specific instance, static methods are the way to go. If you've got a method that pertains to one particular instance, like when I wanted to return an address or print an address, well, it depends on who I'm printing and who I'm returning. Because now I've got all these different people, and I could easily print or return any number of them that I want. So I could say something like Steve.print phone, or not print address, we'll say display address, and we could easily do Tom.display address, or Jed.display address, or even Stacy.display address. So if I run that, you're actually going to see 4 different addresses get displayed all the way through. Okay, so here's Steve and his address. Here's Tom, and yes, it's the same address. Okay, and Jed and Stacy, but at least you see that the name is different each and every time. So that kind of wraps it up for our introduction to object methods and static methods of a class. So again, classes are meant to encapsulate all the information about a particular object or a particular thing that you'd like to code. Here we've got the attributes all held within the constructor, and now we're starting to make all the different things that it can do for that particular object. So keep that in mind anytime you're trying to program something. It doesn't have to be line by line by line anymore. It can be make this, and then we'll have these things communicate with one another. And we'll start talking about that communication piece next as we start having these objects actually interact with things. So we'll probably make a brand new class kind of from scratch, and we'll start building different pieces upon it. So we'll check in the next video. The next video will likely be a nice example of how we can wrap this together and bring it all together into something that's a little bit more useful than just making people and doing different things with them. So we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.